What does it mean when a building becomes too old? Have the memories left the staircases, the parlors, the lofts, the basement? Is a building without memories a dead building? And how do you know when memories have left an old barn, an old house, an old place of worship, an empty mill? When do we decide that an old building must be torn down? How is that decision made? And what happens when not everyone agrees that a building must go? That it's too old, doesn't work anymore, costs too much to repair, that the memories are all gone? Who decides? Hi, this is Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And as a ranger in National Park Service, we really care about the old stuff. The National Park Service actually physically cares for some of the oldest artifacts that date back to human existence on the North American continent. We care about the stories, we care about the memories that these old places have. Fortunately, we're not the only ones. There are folks here in the Blackstone Valley who also share that passion to preserve, that care about those memories and stories that exist in the old buildings that are here in the Blackstone Valley. So why don't you join me as we meet these people with a passion to preserve, as they capture these old buildings and their stories and memories. Older buildings have a fascinating connection to our nation's history. So not only are they interesting from an architectural standpoint, they're also fascinating because they have a great story to tell. We're here in Gloucester, Rhode Island, and we're talking about a major voting rights movement of the 1840s. It seems that Rhode Island's charter, given by King Charles II in 1663, required people to own land in order to vote. Well, being it's the Blackstone Valley, birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, most mill workers, they didn't own land. And so by 1829, fully 60% of the white male population of Rhode Island couldn't vote. They were ineligible. They didn't own land. Now forget the fact if you're African American or Native American or female, because you weren't voting anyhow. So the state of Rhode Island amassed its troops on this hillside behind me to crush this rebellion of people who felt they were entitled to vote. Can you imagine? Well, fortunately, the Dorrites, named after Thomas Dorr, who was the leader of this voting rights movement, didn't show up on this day, and the house that was going to be the hospital didn't have to be used, and the mayhem was avoided. Now, I tell you this story, but because that house today is still part of the landscape, it's had many owners, we know it as the Reuben Mason House, but we're going to meet some very important and very passionate people from Gloucester who are trying to save it.
Well, originally I got involved in the project because I've always been interested in the restoration of old buildings. And as I got involved in the thing, it kind of took on a life of its own with what was involved and what we're doing here and the significance of the building and the historical events that occurred here in the past.
Well, the Reuben Mason House was originally the field hospital for the troops during the Dorr Rebellion. They didn't use it, but it was available for them, and it was Benjamin Keach who was living here at the time. He was a millwright and a carpenter, and they came to the door and asked if, if they could use it as a field hospital, and the first thing they asked him was, "Are you suffrage or law and order?" And he said, "Suffrage to the backbone." But they did it anyway, and so it became the field hospital for the troops. Not for the Dorrites, but for the state troops. Thomas Dorr was the head of the People's Party. he recognized the serious problem that the farmers here in northern Rhode Island were having, because many of the farmers had perhaps 10 boys in the family and only the oldest boy could vote. The voting inequalities were unbelievable at that time. So as a result, there were a lot of angry young men up here.
I've become very impassioned with the history of Gloucester, with the history of Chepachet, and now in particular with the history of this house. It's been a great joy personally for me to be able to contribute my talents to the restoration of this handsome building.
We were able to put this team together, and Rose Lavoie and Harry Anderson and John Doucette and Edna, myself, thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if that could become a Door Rebellion Museum? Based on the history of our area here in Chepachet, and it kind of being an unsung corner of the state.
Well, let's put it this way. In the early years of my experience with the society, we were overjoyed when we raised $500, $800 with the cake sale, for an example, with Heritage Day, Peddler's Fair. Then when this project got on the table and we started to look at $500,000, it was staggering. I was overwhelmed, but had to do it. And obviously, we're on our way. What made the challenge easy, if not actually fun, was the story involved with this building, with the adjacent properties where the Door Rebellion took place. I came to learn that it's a lot of fun, really, telling whoever is interested this story.
The building was in absolutely terrible condition because it had been a hiatus with nobody in it for a short period of time. When we started talking about it, we hadn't really done anything other than walk through the building. Finally, we decided maybe we should uncover, through kind of a forensics, architectural forensics, uncover some of the chimneys and fireplaces and things to see really what was behind here, really how much of the fabric of the original building was here. Ed and Ken had done some research and found records going back into the 1740s, 1750s, that there was a structure here in approximately 1757. So we said, well, is this the structure? Everything you see here in the ceiling, this was all covered with plaster. We had 1960s cabinets and flooring, plywood down with vinyl floors, that sort of thing. So you really couldn't see how old the building was, as you can now with the beautiful exposed whitewashed beams and the original soot from some of the candles and that sort of thing. You couldn't see any of this.
The interesting thing, I think, is the structure on the first floor in the earliest part, which is the southeast portion of the building, the main building, the largest part that was built. The framework was exposed originally, and the date of the house is supposedly in the 1740s, which makes it kind of late to have exposed frame, but you have to remember we're out here in the middle of nowhere in the 1740s. So it's not unusual to have that sort of lag time in framing systems. So the fact that it has an exposed frame, or had an exposed frame, is kind of an important thing historically for this period of architecture.
So we started as a group of the building committee, took apart things ourselves rather than having contractors do it or that sort of thing, so that we could carefully study everything we found as we took it apart. So this took many, many months, as you can imagine, to take out all the plywood flooring, to uncover the board floors, to do look for forensic evidence of nails, the nail evidence of what period the nails were made in. Were they wrought iron nails or were they early cut nails? Just what kind of things we saw there.
All right, John, I understand that when I'm looking at the ceiling, I see a lot of wood here, but I'm being misled. There's some interesting high-tech support in here, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Actually, when we first came to the building, it was covered with sheetrock and there was a beam that ran from that pocket there above the fireplace all the way across to the other side of the room that was providing support for the floor. Apparently they must have realized there was some sagging in the floor, and they decided to strengthen it. Once we removed the ceiling and saw the original fabric in here, we really wanted to expose it and bring it back to what its original appearance would have been in this room during that period. In order for us to do that, we actually had to come up with a scheme to strengthen these floor joists. And what we ended up doing is routing out from the top side a slot that would enable us to put a piece of steel in there that was epoxied in, so that it basically became part of the floor joist member. And now there's enough strength in all of these floor joists to enable us to use the floor above it safely without the need for this temporary beam that was placed in here. And it ultimately gives us our final goal of making it look like what it did in the 1750s.
Aren't these people fantastic, these preservation people here in Gloucester? You just know that they're going to make this building work and complete the restoration and turn it into a museum about the Door Rebellion, an important part of our history, not only here in Rhode Island, but in the country as well. Oh, and you probably want to know, what happened to Thomas Door? Well, after his rebellion was crushed and with a $5,000 reward on his head, he fled the state. The state of Rhode Island, figuring that there was a lot more strength to the civil rights, voting rights movement, decided that they would change the Constitution and allow people to vote by paying a $1 poll tax. Thomas Door, feeling vindicated, came back to the state, was promptly arrested, charged with treason, and put to solitary confinement at hard labor. His health broken, a year later, in 1845, he was released. But Thomas Door's name is synonymous with freedom and voting rights, and is an important part of not only Rhode Island history, but American history. And this house, the Reuben Mason House, is one of those pieces of that story that's still here, thankfully being protected by the people of Gloucester. Well, folks, this building looks pretty good, doesn't it? No problems here, right? Well, to tell the truth, this is one of the first big success stories of the Heritage Corridor. A little federal, state, and local money goes a long way to redoing the exterior of this wonderful fire station, the Farmsville Fire Station, completed in 1853. And it's a great testament to a community coming together to do the exterior. Unfortunately, folks, you can have a pretty exterior and nothing on the inside, and it's nothing but an empty shell. Where are the stories? Where are the memories? Where are the things that happen in this fire station? Well, fortunately, there are some people in communities that have a knack for bringing life to these old buildings. In this case, here in South Grafton, there's one such individual, Skip McNevich. Well, we're inside of this wonderful fire station, and Skip, what was the motivation that brought you here to redo the interior and really bring life to this building?
Well, I grew up in the area, and truly my motivation has been my love of history, the love of my town of Grafton, and architecture, and I particularly love this building. It's a Greek Revival 1853 structure, but also and mainly to honor the men who served here for 115 years in this building from 1853 till 1968.
It's a long time. A lot of things took place here, didn't it?
A lot of things took place here. It's a very usable building. It was used very, very hard all these years, and it's serviced the community, and now again it has new life and will be servicing the community once again as a museum.
And this is one of the great museum pieces right here.
Yes, it is. This engine is a Howard and Davis. It's one of the town's first engines. The town in 1852 purchased 3 such engines for $3,200. This particular machine, the Rescue, was located up in Grafton Center. We also have a second engine, which is owned by Mr. Charles Bolak. Charlie's engine, the Emperor, will be placed in this building. Unfortunately, the Blackstone, which was the engine that was placed here, is in a museum in Arizona. So we do have 2 out of the 3 engines that were used. This is a hand pumper, and 12 men would pull this to a scene. There were 40 men in this particular company, and they would have to actually hitch up the hoses to a water source. It did not carry or support any water on its own. A lot of what is in here is period and correct. I think anytime you do a restoration / renovation, a lot is always interpretation. It's always subject to change, but I've tried very hard to find artifacts and items and equipment that would reflect the period. We really don't know what was in this bay. There is no documentation that would show what was really here, even as far as the furnishings and so forth. They did store some of their equipment here. We don't know what that equipment is. We do not know where they stored it here. We do know that in a meeting in 1853, just prior to starting up, they were making requests to have their own personal equipment placed in the building. The first meeting that the Blackstone Engine Company had was on January 7th in 1854. And it then became officially the Blackstone Engine Company, number 3.
Great. Well, let's go upstairs and see what you've done upstairs. It is pretty remarkable.
The upstairs is Thank you.
This keeps changing every time I come here.
I think it's finally been home to its finished product at this stage.
Look at this.
This is, we know for a fact that in 1859 they had amassed a sum of $25 and got approval to use that $25 to, quote, fit up the engine hall. And they decided at that time to do things like to paper the walls, to buy curtains for the windows. They wanted to buy an oilcloth carpet for the floor, spittoons, a looking glass for the ladies, and a new stove. They also purchased settees and chairs and had them cushioned and grained. We know that. The hall was used for meetings and social events and was used a great deal. We do know that. In 1858, Nelson Ferry, who was the caretaker of the building, he got paid $4 a year to maintain the building. And his job was to keep the fires burning, to keep the lamps trimmed, to clean the spittoons, and to kind of oversee the use of the hall. And as you said, Chuck, he was complaining at a meeting that the dancing parties on Saturday evenings were lasting well beyond 2 a.m. And he was complaining about that at one of the meetings.
You know, I want to point out some of the things that are your handiwork entirely, and that's right here. These pieces here, you can see them around the room of that. Skip, you've done a lot of homework to come up with those molds.
I have. I've done a lot of work and a lot of study. I'm interested in architecture, Chuck, and I knew that they had a looking glass in here, so I kind of designed and made a lot of the items and things you see, the reliefs over the doors. The mantle itself is an older mantle. The original, which was there, was missing. The ceiling had fallen in. The floors were deplorable and black. They were soiled and damaged by water. And I put moldings up throughout. I tried to realistically give it all the bells and whistles of a Victorian Greek revival sitting room. And here in South Grafton, I refer to it as Farnhamsville, Fisherville, and Saundersville. We're trying to instill and bring back some pride. We know we have some nice buildings, and as the old saying goes, when you start seeing flowers on the window boxes, you know the things are on an upturn.
Now, practically speaking, in some buildings, the story is hard to find, the significance obscured. Now, whether it's due to age or decay, you're never quite sure, but it's not quite able to find what the significance is. However, that's certainly not true here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, at St. Anne's Church, where the significance of the story comes out and grabs you in a powerful way. It's a great story, too. A dedicated, hardworking mill parish, an unknown young artist combined to make history here. And the art world, take note, for the artwork here is truly inspirational. And while the story is really remarkable, the end is still very much in doubt.
I'm overwhelmed. Maybe when I was coming to church all the time and seeing it every Sunday, I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have at the time. And I think one of the things that I believe is that as much as we cried when they closed the church, maybe God had a plan that they wanted to put this church on the map. It was only us little parishioners of St. Anne's that knew about this beautiful church. Nobody knew about it in Rhode Island or anywhere around. And I don't think that when we had company coming in from Canada, most of us, unless they came into church on Sunday and they were overwhelmed, we didn't think of bringing them to church to see this beautiful building.
It's very easy to get people impassioned about this place once they get here. So the biggest problem we have is getting people through those doors. We've had a lot of articles written about us in different magazines and newspapers. People will talk about it, but they don't have a true sense of the building because they've never been here. People all the time who have seen pictures of the place, once they walk in, the first thing they say is, "This is nothing like the pictures." As beautiful as they thought the pictures were, when you see this place in person, you get an understanding of the sheer size of it. You get a true sense of its beauty. But what a lot of people comment on when they walk in is that they get a physical sense of sort of warmth, of they could feel that this was quite a family that used to be here. He began in the sanctuary, and if you can imagine this enormous area just engulfed in a wooden scaffolding. One of the unique things about Ninkiri was that he was a hunchback. So when they built the scaffolding, they built it so that the scaffolding was stepped so that he could sit and paint. But when it came time to do the ceiling, and a lot of us have heard the stories of Michelangelo who laid down on his back, well, because of the hunch in his back, Ninkiri couldn't lay down. So they built the platform so that it was about 4 to 5 feet from the ceiling, and he would sit on a 5-gallon pail and paint the ceiling sort of with a crooked neck and a brush in hand, which, after sitting here looking at the ceiling for about 2 minutes, we're always like, all right, time to look down because your neck starts hurting. So if you can imagine him doing that hours on end.
And the colors are so vibrant, His pastels are out of this world. My niece was painting a creche one fall and at a place, and she came here and she painted all her angel in colorful colors, and they said, "Angels are supposed to be dressed in white." She said, "Not in my church."
And we have some wonderful stories that go along with these paintings, such as the largest painting in here, The Last Judgment. At the bottom of the painting, there are 3 devils, 2 of which are facing us. Ninkiri had a sense of humor. He went across to St. Anne's School and went into one of the classrooms and asked the teacher for her 2 most mischievous boys and portrayed them as the two devils that are facing down here.
So who would have guessed, Millie, that as a young girl, your image would be up there for generations of people from Woonsocket and surrounding
I
communities?
don't know. I never thought I'd be 80 years old standing here talking about posing for a picture when I was 13 years old. Well, I had to stand and either stand or sit, mostly stand. It was like with my hands like so, you know, and looking up in the sky when he told me, look up in the heavens. That's all I didn't do much talking of any kind. Well, when it was lunchtime, I'd get a nice sandwich, a peanut butter sandwich, a glass of milk, and I thought that was absolutely wonderful. Oh, a quarter. And in those days, giving me a quarter was out of this world. I'd go home, Ma, I've got a quarter. He gave me a quarter.
To pose, huh?
To pose. It was wonderful.
Some of his paintings, of course, came with some backlash, if you want to say, such as Adam and Eve. People were not happy of the nudity, so he added a couple leaves to it and said to his assistants, that's it, tear down the scaffolding. If the people of St. Anne's want to fix it, they can climb the wall and fix it themselves. Well, needless to say, no one's dared to climb the walls and to fix it themselves.
To me, St. Anne's has a charisma about it. And to know that our grandparents sacrificed so much to build it, and we would destroy it, it doesn't make any sense to us.
It was a symbol of our ancestors who came from Canada to seek a better life, if you can call working in the terrible conditions of the mill factories a better life, where the church was the center of their life, who were generous, who were extremely faithful, and who really gave of themselves to build themselves a place to worship. And so this building has really, not only is it beautiful in its physical features, but it's also a testament to our past and to our ancestors, which makes it even more important to save. Because this is the connection that we have to the past, especially because those ancestors who built this place are the faces in these paintings.
Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And we've heard some amazing stories about some incredible buildings today, and some are clearly still works in progress. Others have already demonstrated they're going to be a great success story. And still others, St. Anne's, is hanging on by the very thinnest of threads to their very existence. Now, we owe a great deal to these passionate preservation people who work so hard in their communities to save these great buildings, the great stories, and the memories. But it's a lot of hard work. The folks in Gloucester at the Reuben Mason House have worked so very hard, but they need some support. They need some folks with a little deeper pockets than they have to make their dream come true. And gee, the work that Skip Mankiewicz has done in South Grafton at the firehouse and the community house is just incredible. But he too needs some assistance. And folks, there can be no greater tragedy than to lose the frescoes at St. Anne's Church. And I urge you, go see for yourself. They do tours on Sundays. It's amazing. And if you go, you too might become one of those passionate preservation people yourself.